Hi and welcome to the Geek Legion of Doom. This is a B-movie review and I'll be having a look at the movie Beneath. So this is a 2013 movie that came out on a limited theatrical run and video on demand at the same time. So this is a kind of fairly simple premise. It tells the story of 6 friends who have just left high school and just kind of celebrate them leaving high school before they kind of go off to do all their different things. They're going to kind of go on this like wilderness trip. We see at the beginning that one of these guys has got some kind of he sort of links to kind of a natural park, something along the lines of that, and he basically convinces all these guys to come into this sort of like natural area where there's a kind of a large lake. However, there's kind of a large creature in the lake, and obviously they get stuck there. They kind of lose both their oars in this rowing boat, and there's a hole in the boat, so it's gradually sinking. And that's the kind of basic premise. I'll kind of go into a little bit more detail in just a second. What's good about this film? Okay, so this film uses practical effects really rather than CGI. So people who aren't fans of the kind of the CGI sort of monsters and stuff would maybe get a kick out of this because the creature is pretty much purely a practical effect. It isn't the best effects in the world, but this is a low budget film, so I don't think it was that bad, to be honest with you. I thought it looked okay. There are a couple of shots where it kind of looks a little bit rubbery, but for the most part I think the actual design looks fairly good, I have to say. It looks very much like a shark in regards to its kind of size, but it's more of just kind of like a mutated freshwater fish of some description. I'm not a fisherman, so I couldn't tell you if it's actually going to be based on a particular species, but there you go. So that's the first thing. The acting I thought also was fairly good across the board. There wasn't any sort of particularly bad acting in this group. So acting fairly good across the board. I'm not saying this is going to be anything Oscar worthy, anything like that, but for this type of film, it's perfectly acceptable and there's no real people that stick out as particularly bad acting. So that's pretty much the positives. So the negatives. The script is horrible in this film. The script is absolutely diabolical. And the reason I say that is we have 6 characters and not one of them is a likeable character. And I don't think it was designed that way. But when they're stuck on this raft, basically, when they're stuck on this rowboat in the middle of the lake, kind of all these sort of like little secrets end up coming out and people end up sort of turning on each other. Fair enough, that's the way it wants to go. But the problem that we're doing like that is it just makes this group of characters seem like a bunch of selfish assholes. And I think they go a little bit too far in the way they kind of act. Now we get early on, we kind of see this kind of what we assume to be the kind of the main protagonist, this guy called Johnny, who's meant to be like the mystical one because he wears a headband, you see, and wears a tooth on his necklace, so he's got to be the mystical one. But he actually, we get the idea, though it's not stated out and out, but we get the idea that he actually knows there is a creature in this lake, yet he still takes his friends on this lake, knowing that there is something dangerous in there. So first of all, you know, our kind of guy who we assume is going to be the main hero has got a big black stripe against his name. Secondly, there's 2 females in this group and 4 guys, and that's a recipe for disaster right there. However, it seems that one of the females has got every other single member of this group somehow being attracted to them or with one degree or another, and they end up sort of almost bickering about, you know, who should be the most eligible for this particular girl, and again it just makes them seem like assholes. Now when we actually, this is going to be a bit of a mild spoiler here, when they actually go out on this lake and they end up getting stuck, they kind of turn on each other and they almost vote each other off to get sort of thrown in the water as a kind of distraction. And I just didn't buy that. It just seemed like people were far too willing to sort of have this idea, and of course when it ultimately turns on themselves, they're kind of, oh no, I don't want to do that. But it just seemed like it went too easily for me. People came out of this situation far too easily. Again, problems with the script. Second thing, there's some huge gaps in logic here. There's actually quite a few examples of this, but just to give you one of the oars ends up in the water, and instead of just using the other oar to kind of fish it in near the boat, we actually see this girl kind of, at this point they know there's something in the water, this girl kind of reaches far out into the water to try and grab it, and obviously gets bitten by this creature. So, you know, stuff like that. Basically, like, why wouldn't you just like use the other oar to simply just bring it straight right next to the boat? Stuff like that. And again, there's lots of examples really, kind of very lapses in logic, just seemed to be ridiculous to me. Now, I've mentioned obviously the actual creature itself kind of looks a bit rubbery. Now, to be honest with you, I don't hold that too much against it because it is a low budget film and they're only going to have to do so much in regards to the effects. And I kind of do respect the fact that they're obviously trying to use practical effects rather than CGI, because, you know, people get a lot of flack for using these sort of CGIs. These sort of CGI monsters and things like that. So I do respect the fact that they have made the effort to make a practical monster. I actually didn't think it was too bad, I have to say. I quite like the design of it. They've got an iris that kind of moves with the light and stuff like that. So, you know, it has got some detail in it. But yeah, there are certain things where it's like a little bit rubbery. But overall, I didn't think the design was all that bad. The main issue here, I would say, is firstly the script. I don't think the cinematography is all that fantastic, if I'm honest, either. So there may be some technical issues as well. Overall, you know, I've certainly seen worse films. I'm quite the fan of the kind of the aquatic horror sort of subgenre, if you like. And I have seen worse films than this. But there's no real surprises here, unfortunately, either. It's a fairly predictable script. And you've got these teenagers making just dumb decisions after dumb decisions. And I always think maybe you can kind of forgive a couple of decisions because these people are going to be panicked at the end of the day. But it's too much. There's too much of it. So I want to give this one a 4 out of 10. So 4 out of 10. And what did you think of it? Leave me a comment and I look forward to seeing you next time. Bye for now.